I've been living sustainably for over 30 years now. There are many challenges to living a simple life. Many people go into it hard, do it for a couple years, and then burn out and go back to the way everyone else lives. In this video, I'm going to talk about my history living sustainably for 30 years and my suggestions for how to sustain this kind of lifestyle over the long term. And at the end, I'll reveal 5 secrets to living sustainably for the long haul. Right now, on our planet and in our economy, we no longer have the choice to live a wasteful lifestyle. And I want you all to live happy, fulfilling lives, knowing you're doing your part to make a difference for yourself and for future generations. So I don't know why Greta Thunberg gets all this attention for what she's done to reduce her impact on climate change. What is she, like 12 years old? So at the most, she could have been living this way for maybe 4 to 5 years. Hey Greta, come back in like 10 years and we'll see if you're still living that way. You might think this is cruel, and obviously I'm joking. Greta Thunberg is a very inspiring, badass spokesperson for her generation. A generation that's going to have to deal with climate change a lot more than mine did. She's a hero for me as well. But the point I'm trying to make here is, living sustainably for 3 years is a lot easier than living sustainably in a radical way for 30 years. And right now, we need everyone to be living sustainably for the rest of their lives, not just for a short time. And I'm pretty sure that if I come back to see Greta in 10 years, she won't be lost in a middle-class lifestyle working a 9-to-5 job, no longer concerned about climate change. It's just not going to happen. But for a lot of people radicalized when they're young, it does happen. People live sustainably or in accordance with their values for a short ideological time when they're young, but tend to give it up as they age. I see a lot of people who dip their toes into sustainable living and others who go in head first. But what tends to be the reality, at least what has been for the last several decades, is that people get into it for a bit, sometimes hard and sometimes lightly, but they don't really stick with it. In order to make real change, we can't be doing this as a fad or a phase of our lives, and then toss it all when we get a little older because it gets old or we get soft or because we come up with a bunch of justifications for giving up on living our ideals. I'm raising a family and need to get a job to support them, and that job takes all my time, so I need to ditch this whole thinking about the future thing. Or people just get sick of doing what they see as sacrificing for a cause whose consequences are not immediately apparent in their lives. When your home isn't being repeatedly destroyed by severe weather caused by climate change, you might not see radically changing your life to do something to stop it as all that important. And studies have been done that find people in general have a hard time fathoming the long-term effects of climate change, so they aren't compelled to act. This kind of information just boggles my mind. Are you serious? People don't understand the consequences of climate change? Who knows why people like us are so different? Because to me it seems pretty obvious what the problem is for our future. And it has seemed pretty obvious to me for about 30 years. And it's only gotten more and more obvious over time. But apparently most people are uneducated or selfish or who knows what. I don't know how to explain it. My impression is that most people are threatened by climate change because it's a scary concept or because they know it means their wasteful lifestyle is in the crosshairs. Early in my adulthood, I knew a lot of people that were all interested in the same radical environmentalism that I was into. But I would say that of all of them, I'm probably the one that eventually got more and more radical the older I got. Usually it goes the other way. Usually people are idealistic early in life when they come upon the great awakening that is the understanding that the right education can give you. The scales come off their eyes and they realize how screwed up the world is in many ways. And in my college days, a lot of young people dealt with this by going to Dead concerts, getting really baked, and dousing themselves in patchouli oil. But some of them actually tried to change the world, and some of them changed their own lives to be in accordance with their values. Many of these people also doused themselves in patchouli oil. Patchouli oil was a pretty big thing back in the 90s. I still see young people living radical lives, but usually they've only been living this way a relatively short time because they're young, and God, isn't that their fault? What's wrong with these young people? Can't they just be a little older, or more experienced? I recently met a young person at an event and struck up a conversation about her inspired ideas for changing the world. It made me realize how idealistic, hopeful, and full of inspiration young people can be. Unfortunately, it can be hard to find someone older that has the same amount of energy and inspiration for changing the world. Why does this happen? Why do people lose their hope and inspiration? Why does their dedication fade? Is it just that when they're young, they're naive about the possibilities or impossibilities? Then there's the other kind of young person dedicated to a cause, the kind that looks skeptically at anyone older than them that doesn't seem to understand their extreme view of the world. I've had much younger people criticize my lifestyle at Dancing Rabbit Eco Village, claiming it wasn't radical enough, when in reality, they had only been living what they thought was a more radical way for about 6 months. And I say to them, yeah, let me revisit you in 10 years and see how you're living, because I bet you won't be living anywhere close to the way you're living right now. Most likely, you'll be sucked into the fast-paced consumer culture and have a good job, raise a family like everyone else, and forget your brief spell of radicalism. Both these examples illustrate the problems with both sides and extremes. You can be so idealistic that you can be naive about the realities of the world and how they might change as you take in new information and experiences. But you can also give up too easily on your ideals and then abandon your radical ways. When we give up too much, we end up contributing to the spiraling downward of our society and environment. But when we're naive about the realities of the world, we can blow a gasket and go the complete other direction. And being arrogant about your ideals and judging good people taking action in a harsh way does no one any good. Before the Industrial Revolution, no one had a choice about living simply. Today, a lot of people can live a life of utterly decadent affluence. Living a simple life is not a choice for billions in the world. They were born into situations that don't allow them the chance at an affluent first world life. But for billions of others, living simply has to be an intentional choice made not to live a much more affluent life. In the US, the default is an unsustainable life. And to live sustainably, we have to make choices that many would see as sacrifices. Where I live at Dancing Rabbit Eco Village, we're choosing not to live with fossil fuels in an economy utterly and nearly totally dependent on fossil fuel for everything. Those of us who are concerned are choosing to reduce our consumption, but it's not easy. Even though climate change wasn't nearly as in your face when I was in my 20s as it is now, it was one of the main motivators that has led me to live this simpler life all these years. But apparently, it wasn't enough of an issue to really motivate much societal change, because now here we are 30 years later, and there's little action and little uproar in the US over climate change, but plenty of consequences. But the choice to live sustainably is less of a choice today than it was for my generation. If you chose not to live sustainably 30 years ago, you would have 25 more years without the serious effects of climate change. But now, already we're seeing huge drought zones, weather like never before recorded, wildfires burning huge tracts of wilderness and residential areas in the West, super strong storms and flooding across the country, climate chaos that's been found to be related to human-caused climate change. Whew, it's a mouthful. I called into the Intuit company today to talk to customer support, and they said that wait times might be longer than usual because of an extreme weather event at one of their offices. Seriously? I've never heard anything like that before. And we better get used to basic supply chain issues, not just because of the pandemic, but because climate events are disrupting our economy and society like never before. But like I said, this was all predicted. Living sustainably really should not be a choice anymore. But in reality, it still is. Most people are choosing to doom their future and the future of all their offspring for a fossil fuel-driven convenient life in the short term. So they may be radicalized early in life and then decide it's too alienating. It's too much of a challenge to the status quo. They see their peers having careers and buying into the consumer lifestyle and getting things they have eschewed, and they feel like maybe they're missing something. But the only thing keeping them from indulging all these luxuries is their will and their dedication to a cause. And at least for my generation, it's been possible to ditch the simple life and get caught up in the affluence of the unsustainable American lifestyle with virtually no consequences. I could look at my life and say, what was I sacrificing all those years riding my bike in the icy winter weather when I could have owned a car and driven everywhere? What was it all for? I mean, why was I a vegetarian for about 16 years of my life before finding more sustainable sources of meat to integrate in small amounts into my diet? Why would I go hungry rather than eat food with meat in it? Because that was my only option at the time. Why did I give up my car and live car-free for almost my entire adult life, even if that limited my options for work dramatically? Why, even when I have the option to use a car, do I bike a couple miles to the grocery store? Why did I move to a radical eco-village where I've lived this hardcore sustainable life for almost 15 years? Why have I limited my use of water for both house and garden for almost 30 years? Why do I limit my use of air conditioning in the heat of summer so dramatically just because I don't want to consume more power than I can sustainably produce? Living this way is not easy and would seem shocking to most Americans, although to the great majority of the world's people, the way even I live is luxurious. I've created a life that makes it easier to live sustainably, but is still not easy. And this is why a relatively small number of people are doing it. And this is why literally everyone I meet these days that lives a mainstream lifestyle looks at me like I'm an alien when I tell them about the way I live. It's like they truly do not understand why I'm doing any of these things. Simple things like composting food waste are absolutely foreign to them because our education system and media have utterly failed in bringing awareness of environmental issues to the next generations. And that makes me think, we're totally f***ed. There are people that know me pretty well, but truly don't seem to understand why I live the way I do. They really don't understand that I've chosen to live this way. It's never been my goal to acquire wealth and things. I've consciously lived simply for 30 years. I've chosen not to make a lot of money. I've chosen not to have a family like everyone else because I don't think the world needs more affluent Americans. Of course, in choosing to live on the fringes of society, we limit the number of people who will understand why we live the way we do. But the point is, I never wanted to impress people with an affluent lifestyle. How is it a sign of strength and success to get rich by destroying the planet and exploiting other people or animals? That's what everyone does, and it's leading to the death of the planet, and it's dooming our future. Anyone who doesn't care about anything can do that. The easiest way to succeed in our society is to not give two shits about anything. My conscience and my values have always limited what I was willing to do in my life. That is what takes true strength. So I thought I'd share with you 5 basic rules I've learned about living sustainably that might help you feel more inspired to stick with it for the long haul. Number 1. Life is more interesting when you're striving. If we're always setting goals to push ourselves to live more sustainably, life will be more interesting. Stagnation gets boring. Striving to be better is interesting. Look at your life and say, what can I change and where can I make improvements? Are there any new ideas or technologies that have come along that I can implement in my life to reduce my impact? And though placing goals on yourself might seem like a constant pressure and stress, often lofty goals seem insurmountable. But when we achieve them, we find it wasn't as hard as we expected. And for all those of you who might invest in various self-help programs, there's no better way to add structure and meaning to your life than to implement improvements that make your life more sustainable. Even things like regular exercise are a part of a healthier and more sustainable lifestyle. Number 2, many ways of living sustainably slow down the pace of life and help you appreciate it more. Reducing your need to consume means you won't have to make as much money to meet your needs. Not having to work as much means you'll have more free time to focus on things that slow your pace and allow reflection. We're here on Earth to live our lives, not to sell them for the benefit of some ultra-rich guy. Our economy is dependent on constant growth, so the apologists of capitalism are really threatened by talk about not buying so much unnecessary crap. But there's plenty of wealth in the world to go around, and plenty of work for everyone if people don't need to constantly be working more and harder in the never-ending quest to buy more and more things. The vast majority of our economy and consumption goes to waste so that we can provide more than full-time jobs for everyone. And the product is a doomed future and landfills full of perfectly edible food and useless products. We need to make our economy smarter, not more wasteful, so we aren't working our lives away to make someone else rich and put tons of crap into landfills. It really is that simple. Number 3, living sustainably creates community, and that's something we all need. You can't live sustainably going it alone, or rather, it is infinitely harder to live sustainably as one person in the wilderness. We need to cooperate with others to build sustainable systems we can all share to reduce our impact. We Americans have maybe been genetically altered, but definitely socially altered to want one of everything for ourselves. This is the unsustainable reality that falsely abundant fossil fuel has ground into our brains for decades. Community helps us share resources and reduce our impact, but it brings so many other positives to our lives. We're social creatures, and throughout history, our cooperation was our key to survival as a species. It still is, and we humans crave social interaction. We Americans have gotten away from it, but when we find community, it can be like finding a forgotten secret ability. Number 4, know your limits, but be constantly challenging them. Going headfirst into a radical lifestyle can be shocking. You might find giving up major things that are deeply ingrained in us from birth will put you on the fringes of society. Living without fossil fuel will put you on the fringes of society. Living without a car, unless you're in a big city with good mass transit, will put you on the fringes of society. Being on the fringes of society can put a constant stress on you to conform. In a world where the vast majority are blindly consuming more and more, completely ignorant of the future they're careening into, it's difficult to reject temptation. Know your limits and don't go overboard. We all have our breaking points, and we need to respect our breaking points because it's much better to have a pressure release than to explode and give it all up for good. I've lasted this long by using some pressure releases. I no longer starve when I'm expecting a situation where I can't eat something sustainable. I'll bring a set of regular metal or ceramic dishes to a dinner where there are only disposables offered, instead of foregoing food so I don't create waste. But sometimes it's fine to just give yourself a break and not take it so seriously. I'm not encouraging giving up. I'm encouraging giving yourself a break from time to time and not stressing about relatively minor violations of your sustainable living values. I used to get much more upset and stressed about not being able to make every sustainable choice I could. It would really weigh on me. But now I don't sweat it. I also don't give up. I constantly push myself to be better. If you both don't sweat the details and still recognize what you're accomplishing and the improvements you're making, you'll be much more flexible, adaptable, and you'll be able to sustain your radical lifestyle much longer, if not indefinitely. It's like a glacier that retreats 1 foot while advancing 3, although in these days of global warming, the opposite is happening. Believe me, if you make radical changes, you will get to know your limits fast. Slow and steady progress is better than blowing a gasket and giving up entirely. And the last one, encourage and support your fellow radical sustainable living friends. Work with them and provide moral and economic support. And when I say economic, I mean economic in the sense of the true meaning of economy, the way we interact with each other on a community scale to provide for our basic needs, not the stock market and jobs report. We are a community, and when we support and work with each other, we're strengthening the spread of sustainable living and making our smarter way of living thrive. And a bonus tip, because 6 tips doesn't make as good a title as 5 tips. Show other people what you're doing. Starting my YouTube channel was like a shot of adrenaline to my sustainable living. I suddenly found new inspiration to continue what I was doing and to make my life even more sustainable by sharing my sustainable life with others. I was no longer doing this in some isolated place where no one knew about it. I was inspiring others, and it turns out that can inspire me. Now, you might notice that I don't say anything about thinking positively about the future. A lot of people have faith that if they think it, everything will be all right. But I don't believe that. That is a luxury that comes from a rich person society. But that doesn't mean we have to be bogged down in a negative view of the future. That doesn't mean we have to go around feeling hopeless all the time. We live in a real world, despite the fantasy world our economy tries to create for us. A world where you can continue to destroy the basic things that feed your existence on the planet and still buy a big boat, 4 vacation homes, have 10 kids, and waste food, water, fossil fuel, and other resources like they were unlimited. There are people around the world suffering a lot more than any of us who have the resources to sit around watching YouTube videos. Many of them can't just be hopeful, but they don't let their situation interfere with their drive for survival or even their happiness. So, that's my wisdom from over 30 years of living sustainably. Believe me, there are many, many other things that keep me going, like taking time to enjoy nature and the things we're trying to preserve, celebrating the change of seasons, doing things to connect yourself to the land. I hope you learned something and it'll be helpful in your life. Share this video with your friends if you found it useful and help inspire them to change their lives and stick with it. Sustainable living is not a burden or a sacrifice. It's actually a self-improvement plan. Give a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below if you have something to add to the discussion or want to tell me to go shove it. But if you are rude, I will likely delete your comment because I am the benevolent dictator of this channel. And if you want to help me continue to produce these videos about sustainable living, go to patreon.com/hardcoresustainable and pitch in a few bucks every time I post a video. And I want to take a moment to thank all of the hardcore sustainable community for their support over the years in keeping me and the channel going by inspiring me to continue to keep it radical, keep it hardcore. And for even more content, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Don't give up. Keep changing your life for the better, and the world will inevitably get better.